Well, maybe you guys should have a bake sale to raise the money. Yeah, a bake sale. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. My name is Nick Garisco, and I'm here with Michael Pelichet. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you like what you hear today, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a great rating on iTunes. We have a lot to cover today. I want to discuss the Saints' new free agent signings, tight end Jared Cook, and return man Marcus Sherels. We have to talk about Christian Wood, the Pelicans breakout, and of course, our best question of the week, which centers around Gronkowski. But first, let's talk about the best story of the week, and that is over the weekend at the NFL owners' meetings, Sean Payton played a large role in getting a new rule passed to prevent the Nola No-Call from happening again, at least for next year. The league announced that the new rule includes offensive and defensive pass interference calls in the instant replay system. That means basically that pass interference call or no call can be challenged by coaches and reviewed by refs during the game. This was passed by a 31-1 vote among teams, and the rule is in effect conditionally for 1 year. Michael, what are your thoughts on this trial run?
One, I think it makes the NFL look a little bit reactive, and we've sort of discussed it a little bit earlier, but I mean, the fact that they're just getting around to this, that they're having a 31-1 vote because of what happened, because of how bad it looked when the Saints didn't go through, or at least when the Saints weren't afforded the right opportunity to go through to the Super Bowl. I think it shows that they're late, but I'm at least happy that they're addressing it. I think it's a move in the right direction. I don't know if it'll solve exactly what they wanted it to solve, but I think it's an attempt, and I mean, that's where I stand with it.
My main takeaway here is that the rule is extremely limited in scope. It's reserved only for pass interference calls and no calls, and I think that's kind of piss poor. I don't think it goes far enough. This is a very narrow rule change that the league, this is about as narrow as a rule change as the league could have gotten away with. And I actually think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the actual issue, because the rule is focused on pass interference, like pass interference is the actual problem. And the league acts like the Nola No-Call shed light on the issue of pass interference. Like, oh, this is this big deal. Pass interference isn't right. But pass interference isn't the issue. The issue is your referees. The referees having too much power, that they weren't held accountable, that their calls were final and not subject to review. That's the issue. Referee mistakes and referee power, and how those human errors, if they're not subject to review, can determine the outcome of very important games. So pass interference isn't the problem, but this rule treats it like it is. The inability to review referee calls is the real problem here. And I think this is what you kind of call a carve-out law. I think it's both upsetting and alarming how much this rule entirely misses the point. It's like trying to fix a crack in your foundation with duct tape. It doesn't solve the problem. And the funny thing is, it's honestly like they can't see what's about to happen next. Michael, what's about to happen next? And the answer is games are about to be decided by other horse crap calls like illegal contact or defensive holding and personal fouls. They're limiting this one restrictive rule to pass interference. There are so many other fouls and penalties that can determine the impact of a very important game.
So I mean, like so how far do you want? So you said that the problem, and I agree. Obviously, there's going to be some things that aren't going to be addressed with this rule, and that will be a problem at some point. So if you had to if you had to create a solution right now for this, what would it be? Because you're saying the problem is that the refs have too much power. So how would you counter that? Like, how would you address that issue?
The way you counter it is you have to make all penalty flags reviewable. So when a ref throws a flag on the play, it is subject to review. And teams get unlimited challenges until they miss a challenge. They get it wrong. Because why are you trying to penalize teams from correcting referees' mistakes? Why are you not trying to hold the refs accountable? I think this rule is the equivalent of somebody playing Tetris on their phone while driving and crashing into somebody else. And then in response, the lawmakers say, hey, let's make a law prohibiting people from playing Tetris on their phone while driving a vehicle, instead of actually focusing on the real issue, which is operating with your mobile device while driving. And they're acting like Tetris is the big issue. And Tetris, of course, is pass interference in this case. And I just think the NFL's response to this crisis is weak. I think it's unimaginative. I think it's inherently flawed. And I think the league refuses to be forward-thinking or innovative. They just wait. You said it perfectly. They just wait for problems to occur, and then they try to fix them in the most limited, narrow way possible. The way you can fix this, other than making all flags reviewable, is the NFL can't be literally scared of innovation like they have been in the past. They've refused to use modern technology for replay angles. Sideline cameras, we've discussed this on the first podcast. Sideline cameras, goal line cameras, ball sensors. That's what the league needs. They need to implement technology. And when I was researching this story, I actually came away with kind of a gold nugget here. I was reading that Bill Belichick, the greatest coach of all time, actually proposed at an owners meeting just like this before, that the NFL should implement goal line cameras. And he did this a couple of years ago. And it was shot down by the NFL because it was too expensive. And the snarky Belichick, you know how he responded in front of everybody? He said, well, maybe you guys should have a bake sale to raise the money. Yeah, a bake sale. And this is a league that makes billions of dollars in revenue every year. I think they made like $15 billion last year in profit alone. And the commissioner himself makes $35 million. That's his annual salary. And the league needs to have a bake sale to be able to afford and install cameras on the goal line. I mean, give me a break. And we've talked about the efficient replay system in other sports, Mike. We've talked about how the World Cup's new replay on soccer offsides calls is instant. Tennis, the best replay system in sports, the Jumbotron. It goes on the Jumbotron, which not only is it quick and efficient, which obviously the NFL really desires, and that's very important for a replay system, but tennis is on the Jumbotron. So the whole crowd gets to see it, and the refs looking at the same thing, the same angles. I love that transparency. The NFL needs that. Instead, the refs just go into this little tunnel or on their personal iPads and look at their own views, which you have no idea what those are.
It's archaic.
Yeah.
I cut it off. I mean, like, it's not just even sports. I mean, the whole reason, like, transparency is everywhere. Like, that's in businesses. That's the reason that public companies that are owned by shareholders have to disclose their financials. Like, this is not unique to sports. This is pretty much everywhere.
Right. And, there's not only easy things like sideline cameras and goal line cameras, but sensors. Hockey has those when the puck crosses the goal line. The NFL could easily put those and the balls are on the goal line. It's like you said, the NFL just refuses to get with the times. Even after the worst officiating error in the league's history spotlighted this massive problem for the game, the league has refused to get with the times. And it's kind of humorous to me that everybody, all the fans, are considering this rule a big win for the Saints and the league. And that's how far we've come, is that the first minor change that actually doesn't even solve the problem, the ball doesn't even land in the fairway here, that's something to celebrate. But don't let this distract you from the truth here. And the truth is that this is actually the weakest response possible. It's the most limited and curtailed response possible by a league that has shown no desire whatsoever to improve the fairness of the games. And the rules' severe limitations kind of verify my mistrust in the league and all but confirm that we should really have zero faith that the league genuinely cares about, the integrity and the fairness of games. Because at this turtle pace, it seems like it's going to take them like a decade to get this right. And if anything, I think the narrow scope of this rule and the 1-year evaluation period just kind of adds fuel to the conspiracy-laden idea that, the Nola No-Call wasn't the worst missed call in sports history, that it was intentional. And this lack of response to what should have been a major PR crisis makes me think that the league will do whatever it takes to keep as much power as possible with the referees.
From what you're saying that they don't care about it. I mean, to me, it's a hierarchy of values. It doesn't appear to be their greatest value that they want full transparency and they want full accountability is probably the right word. I think you used it earlier. For the refs. I mean, it seems like they prioritize other things. And so if money is the issue, which is of course hilarious, and I'm really glad you had this story, that's a ridiculous excuse. I mean, whether that's what they really, maybe that is the issue, but they're not willing to invest it because they're just trying to get as much profit as they can for as little effort as they can. But I think if at the least it does display that the NFL is not primarily concerned with transparency. And I think that's a problem. So yeah, they got to get with it.
And like you said, the rule, don't get me wrong here. I hate the limited, narrow scope of the rule, and I think the league's really done a disservice. I don't think this fixes the problem at all. But it's a step in the right direction, I suppose, right? You can't argue that, allowing the refs to review pass interference is bad for the league, in my opinion. I mean, you're going to have those people that say, oh, it's going to really change the game, and why not review every flag? But obviously I'm on the side that you should be reviewing every flag. But even this rule, I think a lot of people are having questions about how it applies to pass interference itself. For example, now a ref there's still too much discretion there with the refs just to review pass interference. Because now a ref can say, oh, well, actually this pass interference call that would look like a pass interference call is actually not reviewable because it wasn't PI. It was defensive holding or illegal contact, not PI. So it's not reviewable. So we're just going to keep the call in the field. Or, if the ball is overthrown, that or uncatchable, that is a huge part of pass interference, Michael. Like when a ref has to determine whether a ball was actually catchable, because if it's not PI. So how is that part of the replay system? Is the ref determining whether a ball was catchable? Is that part of this whole thing? That hasn't been determined. And of course, Richard Sherman said it best, a defensive back, a great cornerback for Seattle Seahawks, now 49ers, said, when you start reviewing this pass interference play, every call is going to look like it's pass interference, because the problem isn't that, you're reviewing it or the defenders are cheating. The problem is that the rule is so strict to begin with. I mean, you can't contact a receiver after 5 yards. I mean, you can't face guard. I mean, there's just so many rules put in place to help the offense and to promote scoring, and the defense just kind of gets screwed here. I mean, it's already so difficult to play defensive back in the NFL, and now it's going to be even more difficult. I think a lot of our audience might be asking, why didn't the league decide to review all flags? Why not holding? Why not personal fouls? And the league did issue a statement on that, which is worth talking about. It's because pass interference penalties can have a bigger effect on the game because of the yardage that can be awarded, presumably because it's a spot foul and an automatic first down. So in the league's mind, they said that, pass interference penalties can be 45 yards, so it makes this penalty extra important to review. But to me, that just begged, why didn't you start talking? Shouldn't the conversation right there, when you hear that, shouldn't the conversation start with, hey, maybe pass interference shouldn't be a 45-yard spot foul if it's that? I mean, why don't we just do the old college rule where it's a 15-yard penalty? That's a very serious penalty, 15 yards. It's an automatic first down. I just kind of hate, and I think you can agree with this, Michael, I just kind of hate when you're watching a game and it's kind of even a poorly thrown ball where the receiver has to come back to it and it's like 50 yards downfield and there's no catch, and it's likely that the catch wouldn't have been made anyway. Yet, the ball moves 45 or 50 yards downfield. It's a 50-yard penalty. That's crazy to me.
I disagree completely. Yeah, I think it's the opposite. To me, what you should have a problem with is whether that call was made the right way, which this review system could in theory address. But because if I'm throwing the ball like 40 yards, and I mean the guy hasn't caught it yet, but then it's 40 yards downfield and there's interference, I absolutely think they should get 40 yards because that penalty in theory could have gotten rid of a 40-yard gain. I think that's absolutely reasonable. I'm surprised we disagree on that one, honestly.
On the surface, it's easy to say, oh, when a guy interferes with the receiver and prevents him from making a 45-yard catch, you kind of go into your mind thinking like, oh, okay, this guy was clearly about to make this touchdown catch, and he got interfered with, and then that's the reason he didn't score. But I will say most pass interference calls are not like that. Even the ones down the field, most ones downfield, it's like a real debate on whether the receiver was actually going to make the catch anyway. Because a lot of these pass interference calls aren't desperation like, plays where the defender tackles the receiver and really prevents him. It's real ticky-tack stuff where it's like, okay, he kind of contacted his arm and maybe he would have been able to make the catch. But it's just really tough to make that call. And not only is the call so tough, to make the call and have the influence of 45 or 50 yards downfield, that's 5 first downs. That's crazy to me. So that's where we kind of disagree.
Yeah, that's nice. I guess we disagree on something for once, which is nice.
Do you agree that all referee calls should be challenged, or do you think that that's a little too much?
There are not enough challenges in my mind available to coaches at this moment. I like the shoot till you miss thing, but I would at least add in one more. So like you have 2 shoot till you miss sort of things, because I think 1 is just not enough. I mean, if there's, let's just use an extreme example. So let's say there are 6 calls that are challenged and the coach wins each time. That's great, right? Okay, so let's say he misses the 7th. Then all of a sudden he's out of challenges the rest of the game. There was such bad officiating that he had to, and this is an extreme example. I don't expect this to happen very often, but why would a coach be cut off at 7 in that case? Because they had 6 calls that he had to challenge because it wasn't being officiated correctly. And then he was 6 of 7, which is an awesome percentage. And all of a sudden he's out of challenges the rest of the game. And the officiating, which has probably been so poor to begin with, now all of a sudden there's no accountability after that. Does that make sense? Like that to me is the problem. But I do agree. There's you don't want to be. First of all, NFL games are pretty long as it is. You don't want it to.
That's the
so
number
long.
One argument.
Yeah, and that will affect the product in the same way that transparency, or a lack of transparency or a lack of accountability will as well, right? Like they're all affecting the game in different ways, but all in negative ways. And so think, that's the balance of it.
That all goes to cleaning up the replay system that I was speaking of early, making it more efficient to where these challenges don't actually take up so much time and unlike they do in other sports. This is according to Peter King. He says what coaches really wanted was an 8th official upstairs in the officiating booth called a so-called sky judge for every single game. But the league was steadfast against that, according to Peter King, because the presence of already of a replay official at each game, which I just think is so bizarre. Why would you not want this to be more efficient with kind of like a neutral ref upstairs being able to say, hey, this call was not right, fix it, like they do in soccer, like they do in tennis, especially. Unlike they do in basketball and in football. Because in basketball, football are 2 sports that I can think of where the refs actually have to go to some location and view things privately and then waste everyone's time getting a call. It'd be great if somebody was up there, in the booth who was able to make the call immediately and change it like they do with soccer offsides calls.
Yep, I agree. And so we're talking about pass interference. So that's an interesting transition into talking about Jared Cook. So tell me a little bit about him. Tell me about, do you expect him to come in? We have Ben Watson vacating that position, obviously. So, is this someone who can come in and make an impact?
I like the signing a lot because we don't have to rely on the draft. We don't have a lot of draft picks anyway. And Jared Cook is a great locker room presence from all league accounts. And he also just fills a huge need in a closing Super Bowl window. Jared Cook, he's got good size. He's athletic. He's got good speed. I think he brings a lot to the Saints as kind of a receiving tight end. He can't really block that well, and he has been inconsistent. But I do think he helps the Saints a lot. What's your thoughts on the move?
I mean, I think it's going to be really good. I certainly don't see what the negative is in adding another actual threat out there. I think to some extent, besides Kamara and Michael Thomas, they didn't really have. Yeah, I don't really think they had a threat that was consistent enough. I know Ginn certainly had his moments when he's healthy. Yeah, but I mean, like, I think we need another option out there. I think that was exposed later in the season. So I think it's a good move. I worry a little bit about the inflexibility, not being able to block, like you had said about the guy we picked up at running back. I'm blanking on his name right now, but I mean, you said that basically when that person's in, the other team pretty much knows we're not going to throw the ball. And I think in the same way, having someone who can't block that well at tight end somewhat gives away what we're doing. So I think that's the only negative that I see about it.
Well, this time we're in complete agreement because you said it best. The Saints were a little exposed when it was down to Kamara and Michael Thomas. And what Cook brings to this offense is he's a seam stretcher. He'll stretch the field, and he'll make it even more difficult to defend Michael Thomas and Kamara. And you know how Breeze has always kind of locked on to some tight ends in the past where, even dating back to Antonio Gates with the Chargers, we had Jeremy Shockey. Of course, we had Jimmy Graham. Drew Brees has found a way to get the ball to tight ends. And I think Jared Cook is going to be the guy that Coby Fleener, if you recall a couple years ago, was brought in to be, where he's just purely a receiving threat. He can run, he's got good speed, and he can be used in the slot over the middle of the field. And he can really help out the offense from that in the passing game. But, obviously he can't really do much in the running game. And like Fleener, I do want to say this. It's not all optimistic with Jared Cook. I got to say, he does have his flaws. This guy's been in the league for a long time, so we kind of know what type of player he is. He's 31 years old. He's entering his 11th season. He's got great size, but, if you're looking, he's always been, his knock is his inconsistency. He's always been so inconsistent throughout his career. Like last year, for example, he had 190 yards on 9 catches against the Rams in week 1. He had 110 yards and 2 touchdowns against Cleveland. And outside of 4 100-yard games that he had last year, Michael, he had only one game with more than 52 receiving yards. And 8 games out of our 16 that he played for the Raiders last year, 8 games were under 31 receiving yards. So very inconsistent numbers, and even beyond the stats, his hands can be shaky. I was reviewing him last year. He dropped a touchdown against the Chargers in week 5. He dropped 3 passes in one game against Cleveland in week 4. He had a horrible drop on 3rd down, which really kind of turned the game around against the Chargers in week 10. And he had a real ugly, concentration drop in week 12. But like you said, and the guy's athletic. I mean, he can make a great one-handed catch. And in his best play last year, for example, he had this one-handed snag touchdown against the Ravens as he was sliding down. That his best play was actually called back by penalty. So, his favorite routes seem to be the quick out and the quick slant, but his most important route is the seam route because he stretches the field. And I do think that he's going to help the Saints offense, but I do think his stats were probably a little inflated last year with being Derek Carr's go-to guy when, they traded Amari Cooper. Martavis Bryant got suspended. Brandon LaFell hurt his Achilles. He was out of the equation. So I think that's why he kind of put up the numbers he did, kind of had a career year statistically. But overall, he's a good third option for a Saints team that really didn't have other receivers step up outside of Michael Thomas.
Yeah, and I think one of the main things, too, like you mentioned consistency. So obviously, given the choice, you would rather someone be consistent than inconsistent. But I think given the fact that we do have someone, God help me if he's not, but if Michael Thomas is not healthy or if Kamara is not healthy, like, that's a problem. But, I mean, when those guys are getting so many of the touches, I think you're not really looking for someone necessarily to be consistent because you already have your go-to guys. You're looking for someone who's good enough that the teams have to account for him, that he's a threat outside of those guys. So it's harder to through 2 guys at someone like Thomas or, like that kind of thing to me is where someone like Cook hopefully can come in and help.
That's a great point, and we're stats guys, and we hate to talk about negative things, of course, about the Saints and Pelicans, but we are stats guys, and injury regression is a real thing. And Michael Thomas, I believe, has only missed one game, maybe 1 or 2 games in his 3-year career so far. So I'm not gonna, I'm not trying to, go all voodoo on him, but just based on natural probability, there will be times when we will be missing Michael Thomas, when he won't be there. And if we were to miss Michael Thomas last year, when we didn't have, Traquan Smith dealt with injuries, Ted Ginn dealt with injuries, and Cam Meredith was out for pretty much the whole year. If we were to have Michael Thomas miss games last year, that would have been a huge problem. So I actually really love this point that you're saying, that, it kind of helps with the injury risk that that could happen with Kamara or Thomas. They haven't been hurt in their careers yet, but you have to prepare like it can happen.
Yeah, Nick, give me a quick little update on where you think he'll be fantasy-wise. We're just kind of talking about stats, but I want to know, what do you think he'll actually wind up producing next year in terms of fantasy?
I think he'll be drafted as one of the top 10 tight ends in fantasy football next year. I don't like to go all in on free agent signings with a new team for a variety of reasons. But I do think that the tight end field is so weak in fantasy football. There was dominance by Travis Kelce and George Kittle and Zach Ertz at the top, and there's like no middle class at tight end last year due to all these injuries. But this year, I think guys like Hunter Henry, Evan Ingram, and O.J. Howard will go before Jared Cook. I think Cook's going to be slotted around tight end 9 when August comes around, right around Eric Ebron and Vance McDonald range, which will be probably rounds 8, 9, maybe a little higher if you're in a local, New Orleans league, of course. But ultimately, we kind of hit on all the reasons for that. Why you can't be too optimistic, but also he's got a safe floor. He's got a safe floor because he has Drew Brees at quarterback, and Drew Brees had a history of getting the ball to his tight ends. Certainly, he's going to be a factor in the red zone, and the Saints get to the red zone often. But Michael Thomas, he is definitely a target hog now. And Alvin Kamara is a red zone. I mean, he's a beast in the red zone. So that takes a lot of touchdown potentials away from Jared Cook. So there are reasons for optimism there. But I ultimately think that, especially when you include Traquan Smith, Cam Meredith, and Ted Ginn, they should all be healthier this season. There's just a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. And ultimately, I think he's going to end up around tight end 9 overall, if I had to guess. But let's move on from Jared Cook, because the Saints signed Marcus Sherels. He's a kick returner and punt returner of the Minnesota Vikings, and he's a good player. And Michael, I know you watched a little bit of Marcus Sherels in preparation for this. I want to hear your thoughts on what you saw.
He seems like someone that I think could consistently get us a few yards on returns, rather than someone who might be a boomer bust guy and doesn't help us on the vast majority of his punt returns or kick returns, but someone who hits a home run now and then. I'm not necessarily looking for that. I think because the Saints offense is so good, they don't really need that. I think they need someone who can put them in better field position consistently, and that appears to be what he is. But I mean, you know more about him than I do, so.
Right, and because the Saints offense is so good, I really just want somebody who's not going to fumble the ball, right? I want to be able to secure the Saints offense being on the field. But no, Marcus Sherels is one of, honestly, at least in my opinion, and I'm trying to be objective as possible here, but I actually do think that he's one of the best kick and punt returners, especially punt returners in the NFL. And this was a great move by the Saints. It's a 1-year deal. He is 32 years old, but he's lost a little bit of speed over the year, but he's still extremely quick. And the main thing that I see when I'm watching him is this guy's got great vision. He's got a great feel for things when he returns a kick or a punt. He doesn't just kind of adapt as it goes. He's got a plan when he catches the ball. And you kind of see that when you watch his highlights or you're watching Vikings game, that this guy catches the ball and he knows exactly what he wants to do with it, and he makes it happen. He's just really elusive. And this was the big problem for the Saints last year. A lot of people didn't realize it, but we alternated returners last year because we couldn't really find somebody who was consistent for us. And last year, the Saints averaged, I think, 5.2 yards per punt. I could be a little tiny bit off on that stat. But last time I checked, I think we averaged 5.2 yards per punt. And Marcus Sherels himself returned 23 punts last year for an average of 12 yards. That's the fifth highest average in the NFL. He's replacing Tommy Lee Lewis, who is kind of, I'm not going to, kind of had a propensity of making mistakes. I'm looking back at the Carolina Panthers game on Monday night last year where his fumble almost cost us the game there. I think Marcus Sherels is going to be much more reliable. And I do think he's ultimately going to be an upgrade. Right. Yeah, and Sherels is no, yeah, that's good. I mean, Tommy Lewis was always kind of Sean Payton's pet project, and I think he was notified by him by Bill Parcells, who kind of turned him on to him, and we tried him for a couple years, and it just never really panned out for him. Sherels is 5'10", 175 for the record, which is pretty, bigger than Tommy Lee Lewis. And I do want to get your thoughts on Christian Wood and the Pelicans story of the week. But before we do that, are you looking for something fun to do this weekend? Make the drive to the Instigator Ranch and Hatchery in Covington, Louisiana. Home of more than 2,000 alligators, a guided tour gives you the opportunity to observe and learn all about these unique creatures. You can hold small gators and alligator eggs in your hands while a baby gator hatches from it. Seriously, it's incredibly wild. Tours are all year round, rain or shine, and they're under $20. The Instigator Ranch has 4.8 stars on Yelp and is 99% rated on Groupon. Experience the life of Louisiana's most ancient resident. Check out Instigator Ranch in Covington. Michael, we talked a few episodes ago about how this time of the year for the Pelicans is about player development, and how within player development, we're looking for somebody who possesses high upside, star potential. And I don't want to oversell him, but Christian Wood has come out of nowhere and has kind of been killing it for the Pelicans lately. Tell me a little bit about his game.
He's long, he's athletic, he's pretty bouncy. I think he moves pretty well for a big guy. He's got a 7'3" wingspan, which is great. That's I don't want to understate the importance of that. Wingspan is incredibly important in bigs, and a lot of times you'll see bigs that might be really good can't really compete defensively because they don't have long arms. And it sounds so ticky-tack. But it's actually a big thing. Wingspan really matters. And I think that's something where you're like, okay, so if he's athletic, he seems like he'll wind up having a pretty good face-up game. I think he'll wind up extending his range to three. It's super hard to evaluate his shot right now because he just hasn't had enough attempts in the NBA to really justify making any sort of conclusion. Free throw percentage is often what you'll default to if you don't have a lot of shots. So he shoots free throws pretty well, 75 to 80% range. That's a nice indicator of something. But I think at the end of it all, I mean, I don't know what he'll develop into because I haven't seen enough of him, but I know that there are at least some things that I'm pretty excited about.
Well, the Pelicans fans seem pretty pumped up about this guy, and maybe that's just because we're kind of looking for a silver lining at this point in the season as we're more or less tanking here. But I was able to watch one game of him, and this guy he kind of looks like the real deal. Maybe not, of course, not like a star or anything like that, but I'll say the old scouting cliche, he looks like he belongs in the NBA.
Yeah.
And I was curious about whether you think he's got a future with the Pelicans or just a future in this league in general as at least a role player.
You should always be skeptical of anybody when they're performing so well in a very small sample size. I mean, so this guy's played in 4 games for us as of tonight. We're actually going to have another game tonight. But so he's played against Houston, and we lost that game by 23. Then Atlanta, Sacramento, and the Lakers. I mean, 2 of those games are against cupcake teams, Atlanta and the Lakers. Sacramento's a good team this year, so that's a real deal. But and Houston obviously is really good as well. But so it's just, you don't want to overreact to things. And I think that's the tendency is when you see the statistics, he's put up, in order, I'll list his 3 games because Houston only played 8 minutes. But so he put up 23-9, 25-9, 15 and 11. I mean, those are solid numbers.
And the blocks, too. Don't forget the blocks. I think he
That's
had
a good
6
point.
blocks in his first.
Yeah, he did. But I mean, again, so like one of the things, so wingspan often correlates with the ability to block. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you will be able to block because you have long arms. You could be a terrible shot blocker and have long arms, or vice versa. But more often than not, if you're going to be any sort of shot blocker, the tendency is that you're going to have long arms, and he's showing a little bit of that. His block rates are pretty good. I mean, so on a per 36-minute basis in his career, and again, this is only in 400 minutes played, he's got 1.8 blocks per 36, which is really solid. That's a really good indicator. And actually, so like for his entire career, and again, 400 minutes, he's averaging on a per 36, 18, 10, 1.3 steals, 1.8 blocks. And yeah, so I mean, look, there's some good things here. Like, I think he could wind up being a really solid player. I just want to see him do it over a longer period of time. I mean, just as an example, so this year he's shooting 56%, but he's only taken 68 shots. So, any shot that he misses is actually more than 1 percentage point at this juncture. So, like, just as an example, like, he had a shot the other night to beat the buzzer where he was really close to the three-point arc, and he hoisted one, and it banked off the backboard and went in. So if he hadn't made that shot, he would have been closer to, like, 54%. So, like, you're moving that much. It's really hard to put a lot of stock into it. But from what you've seen in the eye test, I completely agree. He certainly seems like someone at the least who could develop into a role player. And, whether that happens, we don't know. But there are some good reasons to believe that he will. Yeah. So at this moment, there are 4 teams that are all cluttered together. So we have, with Memphis, with Dallas, and with Washington, we all have 46 wins at the time that we're recording this. I fully expect that at this moment, the next worst team, I should say, is Minnesota with 43 losses. I think that these 4 teams are going to be in some order. I don't think any of them's dropping out of that. I think, which is good for us, right? So, like, at worst, we're probably going to be the 9th worst team. And when I say at worst, I mean the lowest lottery odds. So the highest lottery odds we could possibly get are at 6 if Memphis, Dallas, and Washington all fall below us. I think Washington is the team that I'm looking at, and I'm saying I think we will finish, quote-unquote, better, with better odds than Washington, because they've got 2 cupcake teams that they're playing that are competing right now, so for like lottery odds. So they're playing New York and Phoenix. I think New York will wind up having the worst record. I think Phoenix... I think Cleveland might. There's a chance that Cleveland catches Phoenix. They might not necessarily, but they're 1 game behind. So Phoenix isn't in a position to be winning games. So I think we might have a good shot at being no worse than 8th. I would love to see 6th. That would be incredible. But if we're looking at the parameters of it, it could be basically that we don't have any worse than a 20% chance at a top 4 pick. And that's pretty solid. I think given everything that's happened this year, that's a good thing. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, my question is and I'm sure the audience is curious about, what is the odds difference between having the 6th pick and having the 9th pick? So that's kind of the spectrum you just gave us about where we could finish with in that range. So the best case scenario, let's say it's pick 6, or sorry, not pick 6, but lottery odds at the 6 highest odds. What are the odds for the 6th, and what are the odds for the 9th?
So when you say the odds, do you mean for the first pick, for the second pick?
Yes, good point. For Zion, that's what I want to know.
Okay. So basically, it's a best case scenario, we get a 9% chance at Zion. Worst case scenario, we get a 4.5. So you literally drop exactly half.
Okay. All right. And I do want to mention real quick, I want to go on record. I got a good feeling about this Christian Wood guy. I actually think he's going to be a significant, at least role player, maybe even starter for the Pelicans next year. And I don't know. It might be a bold to say he's going to be a starter next year, but I don't know. I just got a good feeling about this guy. I think he's going to stick. Let's move on to our last topic of the day, and that's our best question of the week. And as a reminder, you can tweet us your questions at best podcast NOLA, and we'll debate them live in the fourth quarter of our show. This week's best question is from Andrew out of Abita. And Andrew asked, is Rob Gronkowski a Hall of Famer even though he only played 9 seasons? Michael, take a whack at this. What do you think? Is Rob Gronkowski a Hall of Famer?
I think he is because he only played 9 seasons and he amassed crazy stats. I mean, so to me, if you look at it, he's got the 3rd most touchdowns of all time of tight ends. He's 13th all time in receptions. He's 8th in yards. That's a lot to be doing in 9 seasons. I think he's been to the Pro Bowl 5 times and he's won 3 Super Bowls. I mean, I think he's definitely a Hall of Famer. I mean, you have a better idea of what the caliber of player is that would make the Hall of Fame. But I mean, if you're looking at his resume, doing all of that in 9 seasons, I think that's pretty awesome.
Right, and we just were talking about per game statistics, and Gronk's really will blow anyone out of the water, especially the Hall of Famers like Tony Gonzalez, who was known as the best tight end of all time before Gronk. And so from a per game perspective, that's very important to me. So I agree with you, your standpoint of saying, the 9 years, because I know a lot of people care about longevity and everything like that. The 9 years is not it's enough for me to see that he's not only a Hall of Famer, but I actually think he's a first-ballot Hall of Famer. I think he's Gronk is the greatest tight end to ever play the game, and he really is everything I'm looking for in determining who should be in the Hall of Fame. And you just reeled off some stats, and a lot of people look for stats and career longevity, and Super Bowls, of course, are important to the voters. But what I'm looking for in a Hall of Fame player is I have 4 questions. First, was this player the best player at his position at the time he played? And if not, was he the second best? And Gronk has been the best tight end in the NFL, not as a rookie, for every year in his career except for his first and his last season. And the second question I'm looking for is, how was the team affected, like when he wasn't playing? I like to see the team's splits with and without that player. Like, was it a really big deal, assessing his value to the team when he wasn't playing for injury or whatever reason? And of course, we're going to have a huge sample size with that because Gronk has always had durability issues. But since 2010, Brady's completion percentage 4 points higher with Gronk. His yards per attempt 1 yard higher, which is actually a lot in that statistic. His touchdown to interception ratio 5.29 with Gronk, 2.95 without Gronk. It's almost in half. Yeah. And the Patriots, it's not just a Tom Brady thing. The Patriots as a team average 4 more points per game with Gronk in the lineup. This guy made a 4-point difference when he was playing. That should be Hall of Fame worthy right there if you're looking at statistics. The third thing I'm looking for is I want to know how the opponents view this guy. Like, was he specifically schemed against, or was he just kind of another great player? Or did teams have to actually double team this guy almost every play? Did he keep coordinators up at night? And I think it's pretty clear that Gronk was an absolute matchup nightmare. I think teams went out of their way to stop him, and most still couldn't. My fourth and final question for Hall is, did the guy change the game in any way? And I like how some analysts phrase it, can you write the history of football without Rob Gronkowski? And no, you absolutely cannot. He didn't revolutionize the tight end position from the sense that, he said, now teams should throw to tight ends. But the Patriots combo of he and Aaron Hernandez started this dual threat tight end movement that other teams emulated and certainly influenced teams how to utilize tight ends because kind of like chess pieces in the passing game. And those are some of the things you look for. I mean, when you have a guy, this is another thing that goes to legend. When you have a young gun tight end with a huge body who makes this contested catch and he's barreling over defenders down the field, we say, hey, he looks like Rob Gronkowski out there. We don't say, hey, he looks like Jason Witten, or hey, he looks like Tony Gonzalez. And it's no disrespect to them. They're probably Hall of Famers too. But Gronk is the standard, man. He's the greatest of all time. So when you add up with what you mentioned about his Super Bowl wins, that he was on, the Patriots, his playoff wins, his big performances in those big games, and he's such a critical part to the greatest dynasty in football history. I actually think that this guy is a total lock to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And that's even despite his durability and despite his longevity and despite his off-field kind of immaturity antics that I know will rub some of the old geezer dinosaurs voters the wrong way. But anyway, that'll wrap up this week's local episode. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our sponsors. April is NFL Draft Month, and we'll be all over that this month. So make sure you tune into that. And if you like what you heard today, as always, make sure you become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and giving us a great rating on iTunes. We'll be back next week. Tell all your friends, who dat.